I came down Penn Street coming here, or there, I just come across up here down. I thought, no, I'm going to go down by the tabernacle and through the neighborhood there, the old house I was born in. And we got down there and turned the corner, came up 8th Street, and the house that Bill and Meady lived in when they were first married, over across the street. And it's still there, and somebody put siding on it and fixed it all up. Of course, my chain of memory began to reminisce about some of the things that happened back there then. And I just drove on up here, and I thought, well, it was in that very living room that he said he had pulled the blinds. It was complete dark, total darkness. And he began to pray, and that's where the Lord told him, he said, you've paid a great price, but you've stayed the helm, and you've stayed faithful. Therefore I give on you the gift of divine healing. And it began. And I just tell him, we just talking about two people. They went out in the country. This girl by the name of Edith Wright. Bill had prayed for her hundreds of times. She was bound to a wheelchair and her body was all twisted. And they'd bring her into church and they'd go out there, her and my dad and Kurt Hooper, and I don't remember who, I believe George D.R. went out there. And they said, well, Brother Billy, most people called him Billy. Incidentally, my grandpa, he called him Willie. He's just old-fashioned, you know. William, he called him Willie. Anyway, I got a little story to tell about that. Anyway, they went out there, and they said, well, Billy, you come to pray for Edith, and we appreciate it. He said, no, sir, Brother Wright, I didn't. I come to pray for Sister Wright. She'd been told that this few days cancer, lung cancer, was going to take her. And he prayed for her and said, in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, I anoint you with this oil. Satan, depart from her and leave her alone. And she goes over on the couch and began to hemorrhage. My dad said these chunks that were all flesh come out of her on the floor. One son, one of the Wright boys, he didn't have any confidence in faith. Never came to church up there with these folks. Worked hard on the farm. And he began to cuss and stomp and go on and tell Bill he's a hypocrite, heathen, and all this and that. And I'm going to the neighbor's phone call the sheriff. Have you put in jail? My mother's dying. You're the cause of it. He did, but when the sheriff got there, Sister Wright was sitting up on the couch. And he saw the mess in the floor, and he said, my, it looks like somebody butchered hogs or something here. And he said the sheriff talked to Miss Wright, and Miss Wright said, no, she said, I'm healed because I'm just well, I've just been healed. And everybody thought, isn't that the miraculous way how the Lord works? All of those years and all the many times that he prayed for Edith, and the Lord never helped her one bit. But on command, and Bill's vision of Sister Wright going out there, he was being obedient to the will of God, to the exact move. And a miracle happened. The blind lady in their neighborhood was declared legally blind, and he said he had a vision one Saturday night that she would be healed on Sabbath morning. And when the service opened, he told her, I can't remember her name, but he told her that the Lord had told him that night before she's going to be healed. She wasn't totally blind, but she had to feel her way with a cane. And he called her out from where she was sitting. She came up there, and he again anointed her with the oil and said, in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, receive your sight. Then he told her to turn around and go back 3 or 4 rows in the church and tell her who was sitting the third person in that row. She described the man who was sitting there, and he said, go 3 more aisles and tell me the third person in that row. she did. She turned around and said, "Come forth." And she came up there and he said, "Do you think you still need that cane?" And she slung it across the church and said, "No, I've been healed." I drove a taxi cab in Jerusalem. I guess I gained more knowledge from that than anything that I ever done and learned about people. And driving that taxi cab, making acquaintances with people. My grandmother on my mother's side used to play a lot of cards. Her and my two aunts, they had card parties in the home, and then they went to other people's homes. And this lady's name was Rager, and she called the phone or taxi cab one night, wanted to come up here to the government housing project. It used to be right down the road here a little ways, and going to a card game. And she said had to stop and pick up another lady. And I don't know, how it happened that way. I didn't know that, but they lived at 10th and Watt Street. I picked them up, came up 10th Street, and I turned down Penn Street, and I got down to 9th, and people was all out in the street, and there's cars parked everywhere, and Bill was home, and he was having a 3-day healing service. And we just literally got blocked. I said, I can't get there. I'm going to turn around and go back. And she said, well, said to this lady, Miss Regular, what are we going to do? And this lady made some kind of derogatory remark. She said, I've heard about this dud or something like that. Let's just go in there just for instance, see what's going on. And she said, well, we can't get there. Look at all these people getting around out here. Well, we can hear it anyway. Let's go in. Let's go see what happened. Well, lo and behold, how in the world did it? Maybe 2 hours or a little longer, the dispatcher at the cab company said, Don, go pick up 2 ladies at the corner of 8th and 10th Street, going down to 10th and Watt. I thought, oh my, no. You go back to price with them, the 2 ladies I let out. I can't even get in there. But went back up there and the crowd had dissipated. There they was standing on the corner. They got in the back seat, and I knew Miss Rager because I'd been there at her house when I was a small boy with my mom, my grandma, and my 2 aunts. And they sitting in the back seat, and I just said to Miss Rager, I said, you're awful quiet tonight, Miss Rager. You're usually a talker. And she didn't say anything. I turned and I said, don't you feel well, Miss Rager? She began to weep. And she said, we made some awful remarks before we got out of this cave. And how come you come back and get us? All of these things that's happening tonight, it's just not normal, just not normal. I said, I don't know. It's just my turn to come out. And they related to me about 2 people that had been healed in this service. One of them was in a wheelchair. And had been in a wheelchair for several years. And he anointed him and called him forth in the wheelchair, and they got up and walked all the way down to the church and rode the wheelchair out. And that one lady said, yes. She said, I don't know about her, but it scared me to death. It just scared me to death. Said, that poor old soul didn't look like she could even lift her hand. So she got up out of that wheelchair and walked all the way around this church. They was holding a meeting in my grandma's living room. And my grandpa, he wasn't a Christian, but he had a heart in him as big as an elephant. And he loved Bill Branham. He really did. My grandpa said, Willie, he said, you need a church. He said, I know Uncle Shorty, but he called him Uncle, and he was a little short Dutchman. I know Uncle Shorty, but it takes money to get churches. He said, well, we'll see if we can't do something about that. We lived up now, if you counted the houses they told for our house down where Pat and I lived. They lived in the parking lot, and then there'd be 4 houses up, a little shotgun-like house. That's where I was born, right there. And I don't know how they tore down and built new ones other than, but anyway, a man by the name of Bill Ingram. Owned probably
property,
80 or 90% of that whole area called the Illinois Grant up there. He married a wealthy woman, and she passed away and left everything to him. And him and my grandpa, There used to be a place that raced dogs in Jeffersonville, and they fed them dogs horse meat. If a horse died for anything, didn't have contagious disease or something. Mr. Ingram, my grandpa, before he married this wealthy woman, would skin the horses and sell the skin to the rendering company over Lowell, and the meat to the people out there to feed those dogs. So they was very good friend, very good friend. And he went to Mr. Ingram, told Mr. Ingram, said, those people need a church. And they don't have any money to buy any lots with, nothing. And he said, I want to talk to you about that lot on the corner there. I've heard people say there was cattails growed up in there in wet weather, but I never did see no cattails in there. But by the same token, it was real low, and I did see it flooded out one time with 3 or 4 foot of water in it. But anyway, Mr. Ingram said, well, what do you suggest, Shorty? And he said, I wonder what we can do about letting them have that lot on the corner there. I know it ain't mine, but I know you. He said, well, listen, he said, I've told you that any of this property in this whole neighborhood here, if you have any use of it, you put it to use. And we did. We had horse pastures down here 3 or 4 blocks on the corner, and had another one on down another 2 or 3 blocks where we pastured the horses. My grandpa he had a salvage yard, a junkyard, and bought and sold horses, mules, traded. And he said, that goes for that corner too. And he said, you mean let them have it for church? He said, yeah, go ahead. No need to me. So then he said, told Bill, you know what happened? He said, you go get that ground, Mr. Ingram, we'll let y'all have that ground and build your church on. And he said, well, we sure do appreciate your help, Uncle Shorty, but it takes, where are we going to get the money to build a church? He said, well, you ask the same question, where are you going to get the money to buy the lot? You got the lot. He said, you go get the church too, I guess. But anyway, there's a man in this town, and he's got a son, or maybe 2, still living, by the name of Edel, August Edel. And he was a bricklayer, block layer. My grandpa went to him, and they was very, very good friends. And he told him about the situation, and he said, well, I'll tell you what. If you can get the men to carry the block and mix the mortar, I'll lay them up for the church. So, Grandpa got a couple of teams of horses and wagons, began to haul dirt and stuff in there, and cinders. And down at Colgate, called them on the plant, they hauled cinders in there and filled it in. Dug ditches and mixed concrete by hand back there then. Mixed the concrete and poured the footing in, and began to talk to people, and they began to rob their piggy banks and just take in earnings and wash and clean houses. And just like 15 or 20 people just began to put their work together and built the thing together. And I remember I was 6 years old, and they had the foundation poured, and Stradle was laying the block, and they used a good big 12-inch block for the first couple, 3 rolls, so it would be a solid foundation. And I sat in the doorway, and I never thought anything about it then, but since then, I sat there and watched them fellas carry their block there and him lay them up there and watch the walls of the church gradually go up. And I got to thinking about who they was, carried the block and mixed the mortar and all that, and there wasn't one of them Christians. Not a one. They were neighborhood, young teenagers and young men lived in the neighborhood. Work was very hard to find them because it was during the Depression, right after. And they laid them blocks up and the walls up, and I don't know who it was now, but my grandpa knew somebody out at the quartermaster depot. He talked to them, and they had those trusses, and they were boulder trusses like this, bow truss. He went out there and talked to them, told them how many they needed, and they said, well, we're not using. They had some kind of committee meeting, and they told them what it was for, and they said, well, let them have them. I said, well, they just go lay there and rot, so just let them have them. So I remember they took 2 teams of horses and 2 wagons, and then would be long and would span the whole church and leave it open. And they put them on the 2 wagons at the angle and brought them down Penn Street to the quartermaster on them 2 wagons, one at a time. And then they made a A-frame-like thing with block and tackle and pulled them up and put them up there. But finally the church, it went up. They covered all that dirt and sand with sawdust, regular fine granular sawdust. Made wooden benches. Had a big cast iron heating stove on each side of the church. And they'd get them so hot in the wintertime they'd be cherry red.
Well, Don, did they have sawdust on the floor?
They had sawdust on the floor, yeah. And the wooden benches. And we got a little girl in our church now, her name's Elizabeth. And she is really a good kid. And every now and then on prayer meeting night, Wednesday night, they ask her to lead songs, and her favorite song is Coming Down. And when the roll is called up yonder. And when she leads songs, she has one of them songs, maybe both of them. And I can close my eyes and I still see Miss Wisehart, and Miss Nellie, and my grandma, and Miss Broy, and others old and marching around that church, shouting at the top of their voice, coming down the master calls, coming down. It's going and going and going. You don't hear it no more. People don't shout no more in church like they used to. They used to be happy. Didn't have nothing. Just probably knew where the next bite was coming from. But they loved God so much. And in the summertime, all those people along 8th Street there would sit out on their front porches. They'd raise the windows of the church. And they'd sing, and the sound would carry out through the whole neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I imagine there's many people probably saved on their front porches in that neighborhood as they were in the church, or maybe more. In 1934, he baptized my grandma at the foot of Spring Street in the Ohio River, and I've heard it said that she was the first one that he baptized in the name. And he based his ministry on Acts 2:38. Repent and be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ, you shall receive the gift of the Holy Ghost. Bill had mixed emotions about the gift of tongues. There was a man who attended the tabernacle of Jeff, and every Sunday morning, you could just almost put your money down if you're the better that he will stand up and babble something in tongues. Every Sunday morning. Finally, one Sunday morning, Bill just got up and walked to the podium and called his name and said, unless somebody interprets what you're saying, and it edifies this church, I don't want to hear you again, ever in the service here. And he did dumbfounded, he just sat down. And other than times he would visit with us at our home. In 1935, Christmas night, our grandmother died. She cooked a big meal on 1935 Christmas Day for the church people, which was 30 or 35 people. And Bill always bragged about how good a coconut pie my grandma could make. He said, Sister Ida makes the best coconut pie you ever put in your mouth. And he did visit her pretty often, you know, because he thought so much of her. But other than that, he always said, hey, Don, I'll tell you what, we're going to go squirrel hunting. When I was yesterday, see, the job he had was work for public service. And he became a game warden as well. And he checked those big overhead tension lines and wires. And he had many experiences. He found, later on, they thought it was a coy dog. It was a half coyote or half wolf and half dog. It looked like a collie dog, but he carried scraps with him on his route and fed it. It stayed in a cave up in the Henryville Forestry. And he made friends with it, and it got to walking the route with him, so he brought it home with him one day. And the old lady there in that little shotgun house that him and me had rented from, she was just an evil old woman. I can't remember her name now. You remember that old lady's name? But Meady come over home one day, and she said she needed help. So my grandpa said, go over there with her, Don, and see what's the matter. She said the dog's awful sick and bleeding and everything. I went over there and said the dog stretched out on a little pallet like in the kitchen. Bill was out on his job, and he'd sometimes be gone 2 or 3 days, and he'd stay out in the woods. He'd be so far in there to walk back out, and he'd stay in them caves and just make a little lean-to or something, you know, spend the night. He was a notorious outdoorsman. I believe he could have lived off without a pocket or anything. To eat, he would dug at the roots out of the ground. But anyway, that old lady didn't like him having that dog there, although it wouldn't bother nothing. They had it chained up to the shed, and she bleeding out of its mouth and everything like it was. And I went back and told my grandpa, and he said, well, that old lady's poisoned that dog with strychnine, or either fed it some meat that had glass in it. Ground up meat and glass mixed up in it, just poured test, and all of it was bleeding to death inside. And I remember Mitty was so afraid, and she so hated to tell Bill when he got home so bad that dog died. But she said, well, nothing could be done, you know. But, you know, airplane can do mysterious things in the air with these vapors. But when Bill was laid to rest, they had seen on their tabernacle, and each one of the ministers that come out of his ministry had a little something to say, 10, 15 minutes. They had the county police and city police blocked off for blocks around. Thousands of people come to the funeral. Standing outside, they had loudspeakers on the telephone post. You could hear the preacher speaking. My wife and I was right on the edge of 8th Street, about that side door. And I don't know how I looked up, and I looked at her and I said, Pat, she said, what? I said, look. They had a perfect cross. Perfect cross in the sky right up over top of the tabernacle. Now, a vapor from an airplane could have done that easy, but it would vaporize in 10 or 15 minutes. They stayed up there for over an hour.
You've heard these stories about how, just us three, how he has impressed our lives. And if there's multitudes of people that were in these meetings that had heard him preach and teach and heal, it's no wonder that there's such a big crowd there at the church. When you've seen that, it doesn't go away. But who else has done it? Who else do they know has done these things? He was God put him here for a special reason.
I've seen Bill walking the banks of 14 Mile Creek and Banks Woods, and another man or two following behind him, because I was up there fishing one day. I looked under the bridge and I saw Bill walking along the bank, and I put my hand up my mouth and I said, "Hi, Willie." He said, "There's a Weber around here somewhere." Anyway, he come over and we talked for a little bit.
My mother just thought the world of Bill Branham. We all did, you know. He was family. He really was family, you know. He wasn't blood kin, but Mita was. But Mother had tuberculosis and was confined to a bed, and she was, the stipulation was that she was to go to a sanitarium, but she would not go away and leave us young family there, and so the doctor let her stay at home, but she had to stay in one room in isolation, and us kids could see her maybe 10 or 20 minutes a day. But Bill would come by and see her all the time, you know, and he was out walking the lines for public service up in Henryville, and he had a vision to come and pray for my mother. He left his post and came to Jeffersonville and prayed for her that afternoon, and she got out of bed and was healed and never did go back to bed. She was healed and the tuberculosis was gone.
My uncle had emphysema, and he was very near death, and my aunt was at the hospital with him, and so I went out there about 8:30 to stay with him and let my aunt go home for a little while, and lo and behold, I had no idea Bill was out on somewhere on a healing service, holding a healing service or someplace, and I didn't even know he was in town or whatever, you know. But when he got back in town, his brother Doc, that lives across the street from the church there now, told him, said, "Bill, something great happened while he was gone." I said, "What's that?" I said, "Don Weber and his wife Pat got saved up that little church up at Utica." And it said that they think Don's going to start teaching the adult Sunday school class. Said the Lord had just blessed him and give him scripture and give him ability. But he said, you know, his uncle was really near death at the Clark County Hospital. And Bill said, "Well, I'll go out there." And I was sitting there in a room with him. And I walked up to the door and I looked and it was Bill. He was standing there in the door. Just a perfect silhouette picture right in the doorway. And I stepped out in the hall and he said, the doc was telling me about the good news. He said, oh, you don't know how I am so blessed. But what about your uncle? I said, yeah, he's got emphysema. He's just near death. And I just show you, boy, how it I said, yeah, he is, Bill. He's pretty near death. And he said, would you want me to pray for him? And I said, he don't know a thing in the world. I said, he asked me to, why I changed my life like I did and what all this about getting saved and all this. And I said, you asked me to do something for you one time, put a little roof on a pump house, and I did. I said, why did you ask me to do it? He said, well, because I knew you would do it. I said, well, that's why I made a promise to God. I know he'd keep his promise, I'll keep mine. And he said, well, how did you come to that? I said, well, just praying. And he said, well, pray for me. And I said, I said, my goodness sakes alive, what am I going to do? So I went over beside the bed and I remembered one of the songs that I did. Oh Lord my God, how great thou art. And I began to quote that song to him as a prayer. And then Bill came afterwards and I talked to him. He said, well, pray for him. Come in. He talked to Monkey's wife. Mister, you're just a young man. I said, yes, I'm only 53. He said, you're just a young man. He said, I just believe the Lord has got some act of mercy for you. He said, there's a lot of life left in you yet. He talked to him, put him at ease. And he looked at me and he started praying and I bowed my head and all of a sudden I heard him quit praying. And I looked up and he was gone. I looked down and he was standing out in the hall. And I walked out there and I said, Bill, what's wrong? He said, Don, he said, there's an evil spirit in that room that I can't overcome. He said that my prayer was hitting that wall and bouncing right back in my face. And he said, if you would, you go back in there. You tell your aunt if she would give her heart to the Lord tonight, he would heal her husband and they could walk out of here hand in hand. And I went in there and told my aunt and she said, I don't believe in that stuff. You know better to come to me, Aunt Van, that I don't believe in that stuff. I don't want to hear that. I am not ready for that kind of a life. And she wouldn't do it. And Bill said, well, I'm sorry, Don. I can't do nothing. Can't do nothing. And my aunt walked around. She come home that nursing home out there and walk around the house going, didn't know, just chattering along like some little child that didn't know what they was talking about. The last couple of years of her life was terrible.
Yeah, the first meeting my dad was in February. I believe it was February the 9th, 1951, at I think it was Calvary Temple in Los Angeles. And Dad was living in Los Angeles at the time. I was born in 53, so this was in February of 51. He had moved to Los Angeles after the war. He's from Southern Illinois. Both of his parents died. He moved out to Los Angeles, living alone, and was raised Baptist. But he had seen an article in the paper, an advertisement to go to Brother Branham's meeting, and he thought that sounded interesting. So he went to Brother Branham's meeting, and it was the night after Congressman Upshaw had been healed. And Congressman Upshaw gave his testimony, and my dad heard that. And on the 8th of February, Congressman Upshaw had been in Brother Branham's meeting after having been in a wheelchair after a farming accident that he had more than 60 years previously. I think it was like 67 years earlier when he was 14 years old. And his entire life he had been in a wheelchair, became a famous person, became a congressman, and was even going to run for president at one point. And he was way up in his 70s when he went to Brother Branham's meetings. Brother Branham saw a vision of him, called him out of the audience, saw him standing, and he told him to rise up out of the wheelchair. And he went around the world giving his testimony for a few years. But my dad became friends with him and his wife, and my mother also. And they were married in 52, and they visited in their home.
Congressman Upshaw.
Congressman Upshaw.
Yep.
And even if I was born in July of 53, and I was dedicated at the World Church. It was O.L. Jagger's ministry that my parents were attending services there, and I was dedicated there. And in my baby book, the witness is Congressman Upshaw's wife.
Wow.
It's written right there. And so they were visiting back and forth. I don't remember her. I think by the time I was old enough to remember, she'd moved or something. And the first meeting that I remember going to Brother Branham's was in Long Beach, California, when I was about 7 years old. But this time, and my parents often attended Brother Branham's meetings when he came to town. My mother didn't have any other children. A number of doctors, I think 5 doctors, had told her she could not have any more children. She had some problems with the womb. And my dad had been in a very bad accident, and he had a couple of slip discs, and I remember that he would roll on the floor at night trying to straighten out his discs. And he had been thrown he was driving a concrete truck, and the road had given way, and he jumped out of the window of the concrete truck. He was sailing through the air with the truck, and he survived that, but he was always in pain. And when I was a child, I had a big raised birthmark here that would fill up with pus, and it would turn all black and blood, and the doctors had told my mother that when I got older they could operate on it and remove that and put other skin there or something. But they took me to Brother Branham's meeting when I was about a year and a half old. And he just laid his hand on me and said, "God bless the baby," and that went away. Within 2 months, it was totally gone.
Praise the Lord.
But both of them being sick or having problems, and being in many of Brother Branham's meetings, they never got a prayer card and never saw it. And I've asked my dad about it. Why didn't he get a prayer card? And he said, well, it just seemed like there were so many other people that were in so much worse shape than he was. He was working, and my mother was fine, and she just couldn't have any more children. So they didn't do it. And it was now February the 8th, 1964. We lived in Los Angeles, and we went up to Bakersfield, California for Brother Branham's meetings up there at the Kern County Fairgrounds. And before we went there, we stopped at a restaurant, Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant. And there was a man in line next to us when we were standing there, and he was talking to my dad, and he was also going to Brother Branham's meeting, and he had something wrong with him, and something wrong with his stomach, I think it was. And so they talked a little bit, and then we got to the fairgrounds there, and it was a big auditorium. So at least 2,000 people, maybe more, were in that meeting, in those meetings there in Bakersfield. And so we sat right in the middle of the auditorium, and there's just people everywhere all around us. But by coincidence, but of course there's no coincidence with God, it just so happened that Mrs. Upshaw, Congressman Upshaw's wife, was sitting directly in front of me. So it was me and my mother and my father, and she was right in front of me. And they introduced me to her, and they were so happy to see her, and she was happy to see them. And so Brother Branham preached the token in Bakersfield that night. And the first person he called out of the audience was that man that we had met in Kentucky Fried Chicken. He said, "There's a man sitting here by the name of Mr. Price." And
How do you spell that?
I think it's Price, Price. And he's suffering in the stomach, and he said, "Stand up, Mr. Price." And Mr. Price stood up, and my mother looked over, and it was the same man. And she said, "That's the man we saw at the restaurant." And immediately Brother Branham wheeled around, and he said, there's a man sitting here. Here's a fine contact of faith. That's what he said. Here's a fine contact of faith. And there's a man by the name of Mr. Flanagan, and he's suffering in the stomach. And and he's also suffering in the back. That's thus saith the Lord. And that's your wife sitting there next to you. She's suffering too, and it's in the womb. It's thus saith the Lord. My mother, of course, was just screaming, and you can still hear her on the tape. If you listen to the tape, you can hear my mother scream, and she's just really screaming. So they were healed that night, and but I was thinking about that, how that, and I think Mrs. Upshaw had said that it was 13 years. It was 13 years to the day that her husband had been healed in Brother Branham's meeting. Once again, February the 8th, now 13 years later, 1964 from 51. And she's sitting right there with us behind her that she knew. My parents had been in each other's house and visited. So when he called my parents out by name, she knew who they were. I mean, she'd just been talking to, and here was on the 13th anniversary of her own husband's healing, which was a tremendous healing. I mean, it was just a very famous kind of thing. And so I was thinking how that must have been so exciting for her. So exciting. And so anyway, the interesting thing is that my dad, that I know of, he never suffered in his stomach. When Brother Branham said about Mr. Flanagan suffering in his stomach and in his back definitely had been in that accident. And what my dad was, I never asked him about it. I did ask him about, well, what was he praying for healing or anything at that time? And he said, no, not at all. He was just praying, because we were receiving the tapes at that time and listening to the tapes, and he was praying, dear God, I know that this is your prophet, this is Elijah the prophet, Malachi 4, 5, and 6, Revelation 10, 7, Luke 17, 30, and I was just quoting those scriptures, and that's what Brother Branham said, here's a fine contact of faith. But he never ever said anything, and I never asked him about the business of the stomach. And my dad, I mean, you know, I'm sure he would have said, well, if Brother Branham said I was suffering in the stomach, I was suffering in the stomach. I just didn't know it. Because there was a lot of times he'd call people out with cancers, and they didn't even know they had cancer. I mean, it was very, very common that people don't know what kind of illnesses that they have.
Or the doctors.
Or the doctors or anything. But still, I often wondered about that, and myself. And then, of course, I was suffering so much in my stomach, and I had ulcer, and I was taking this horrible medication, and I got to think, well, you know, my dad wasn't the only Mr. Flanagan sitting right there. I was sitting right there, and I had stomach problems, and I had them then, and then all the way through, and I wanted to just claim, because Brother Joseph was talking about how that Brother Branham, he's preaching these sermons now for today, right now.
Yeah.
And here I am, you know, I can claim this. I am David Flanagan. I can claim it. And I am Mr. Flanagan. So 50 years later, or more than 50 years later, I claim my healing. And so I changed my diet and got on that keto in it. And I am healed. And since then, in 6 months now, more than 6 months, it's from June, I'm off all medication. I was taking this omeprazole previously, Ratatidine, it's all stomach medication problems. I was taking Alka-Seltzer almost every day, several packs of Alka-Seltzer, and levothyroxine for the thyroid, and I'm off. I'm not taking any medication. I'm totally drug-free, and I'm feeling so much better, and I'm giving the praise and glory to God.
Amen.
That's it. Yeah.
So then, so your dad was Brother Tommy Flanagan.
Yeah.
So what was it like to be around your dad when he was witnessing all the time, trying to win souls to the Lord?
Oh yeah, he was one that really, his whole life was dedicated to giving out the message to strangers, and he was fearless on it. And especially one-on-one, he would talk to people, he would talk to anyone, and many, many times people rejected him entirely. But as he got older, and an older man walking around, people would take it from him more. And he seemed like he felt like God would draw him to various people, and he brought many, and he gave out many. And I remember every day he'd come and say, well, I had 12 different people I gave out the message to today, to 10, 7, 6. But usually it was around 7 or 8, you know, or 1 or 2, but every single day, consistently for year after year after year. And I mean, I once made a calculation of it. It was way up in the thousands. I don't know how many it could be. But of course, you know, and Brother Billy Paul once told me, your dad gives the message out to more people than anyone that I know of. He said, you have ministers and stuff, and they preach to a group, but you know, they're preaching to their congregation. Your dad is out going to truck stops and restaurants and different places, and wherever he is, he's at Walmart. He's just standing in line. I mean, just constantly giving it out, and and many of the people that he gave out to maybe gave out to others, and so if you could count the number of people that came in under his ministry there, it must be a tremendous number. Even
Paul Branham's wife.
She came in under my dad, yeah. Brother Marconda came in under my dad. I remember when Dad gave Brother Marconda the tapes, my mother had some relatives who were visiting us in California, and Brother Branham was still alive at the time. And so my dad was, we went over these Italian people's house, Brother Marconda and his parents and my mother and them. They were all sitting around talking Italian, and my dad, he didn't know any Italian, and Brother Marconda started talking to my dad, and my dad immediately started telling me about Brother Branham, and gave him a big sack full of tapes, those old reel-to-reel tapes that he had out in the car. We had the big wool and sock recorder in the car, I'd plug it into the cigarette lighter and listen to the tapes. And so he gave Brother Marconda, and who at the time was a businessman in Los Angeles, had money, and he got himself a recorder, and he and my dad started going to the messages together. A lot of different places. They'd come to Phoenix and go to Brother Branham's messages, and just before my dad passed away, Brother Joseph had played Birth Pains. It's one of the tapes he had chosen to play one night or one Sunday. And Sneffrid would go over there and then let him listen to the streaming and listen to the tape. And when she put on Birth Pains, he said, I was there. I was there when Brother Branham preached it. So it was something that he remembered that right away. And
1965, right? Birth Pains.
It was probably in 65, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, praise the Lord. Thank you, Brother David.
You're welcome.
All right.
All he did, he walked to the edge of the platform and he looked at the stretchers in front of him. And he said to the first woman on the first stretcher, who was out, she was completely, what would you say, either the drugs had put her out or she was in a coma. It was, but she's got a sister sitting next to her. I have the medical profession who are now standing up. And he says to her, the medical profession have told you you've got this sickness and that sickness. And he said, that's not right. What you have, and he named some things, and he said to her, in the name of Jesus, get up and walk. Well, I think you could count 3 when she sat bolt upright, started pulling the stuff out of her nose and mouth, started yanking out of her arm. The sister is screaming. The two doctors run forward to help. My hair is standing on edge. I can't believe what I'm seeing. You know, the Bible says even if you see, they won't believe. Yeah. I understand that. I saw it and I still couldn't believe it. I could not believe what I'm seeing. Then he went to the next one, same thing, same thing, same thing. Every stretcher was empty within 2 or 3 minutes. No, there's nobody in them. I don't know. It's electrifying, it's frightening. It was awesome. People in the audience fainting, people screaming, some shouting, some clapping, many crying, some laughing. It was like a madhouse. And here I am, and here I know nothing. Well, that was the first night. But he now prayed. He said, I'm going to pray for God to heal and deliver, and I'm coming against evil forces. And he actually, it was like as if he was speaking to the devil. That's the feeling I got, just a feeling.
Yeah.
And then he called upon the name of the Lord. I don't remember the words, and I don't remember the prayer, but what I do remember, right, starting from the town end of the racecourse, it was like rolling thunder. Everybody heard, anybody who was in that racecourse trembled. It rolled, and like waves of wind, but there was no wind. My hair, in those days I had good hair, it didn't move. My shirt never moved, but the wind was there. Yeah. Then the Africans, and there were thousands of them, went wild. They grabbed the picket fences, they grabbed the benches, and started waving in the air, and it came across to everybody. This rolling thunder, wind is the best way I can explain it. And then you could hear it receding. And when it had receded, people were getting off their stretchers, people were stretching their legs, people were standing with arms up, some were laying out flat on the ground, some were just sitting, some crying, some laughing, some weeping. Jehovah's Witnesses had come to mock and make fun of us. They actually, one of them was a very good customer of mine, and he told me during the week, he said, Bob, I think I was paying the wages that Friday early, and he came and he said, Bob, I see you tomorrow at the racecourse, and we're going to have fun with you. Because he didn't expect any healings. You know how we pray for people and they never get healed. So that was the end of the racecourse. He flew away, but before he flew away, there was a connection between him and I in a most in a very deep way. Deep. There's something in here. It's just, he took me by the elbow and he walked me away from the plane. But I remember I was very young then. And he just told me, he said, I've got to tell you what's going to happen to you. He said, you'll stand before kings and princes, change the destiny of nations. You'd have great opposition. And he went down the line about everything he said has happened.
So I just promised the Lord, I said, Lord, you just get me home, I'll make it right with you. So when it came time for me to come home, we got on the ship and on the way home, well, it was real foggy, you know, Brother Peter, and coming into Los Angeles, and the only thing was stuck in my mind that how this lighthouse was out there. It was guiding us to the shore. And finally, after so many hours, we came into the port in Los Angeles, and got there, and it's just so good to feel touch the old Mother Earth again. You know, didn't think I'd ever come back to it from after the war, but God spared my life. So finally, I went on down to another station and received a discharge, and I came, got on the bus and came home, and I had, as I said, I had a praying mother, and she wanted me to go to church, you know, with her, and I'd go with her, and I met my wife, and we all went to church, but I was so under conviction I could never get satisfied. And I just went to one altar after another one. So I told my mother, I said, Mother, I don't have what you have, but I said, one of these days, I said, I know what I'm looking for. And so practically a year had passed. It was 1946, and my wife, she wanted to be back in Arkansas was, to where our first baby was to be born. And so after our baby was born, well, we heard Brother BRANHAM going to be in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And so as we thought on it, and I said, well, honey, I said, I don't want to go unless you go. She said, you go ahead. She persuaded me to go ahead. He's getting a big bus load, you know, to go over there. And so I said, okay, I'll go with them. And so we got on the bus and started out for Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And you know, Brother Peter, you know, coming up to the meetings, people was coming in amulets, and people was dropped them off on any way to get there in this church we were at. And we got up there in the top balcony as the only seats we could get. And while Brother BRANHAM was coming out bringing the message, he preached a very short message, and he had a prayer line. And this boy that went over with me on this bus, he was cross-eyed, and a few other people that I knew that were very ill. And so, as I was watching Brother BRANHAM pray, and blind eyes open, and deaf ears unstopped, well, you know, I couldn't get over that feeling. I wanted to shake that man's hand. And so I pressed my way down through the crowd, and I got to Brother BRANHAM, and I said, Brother BRANHAM, I'd love to shake your hand. So I got in and I shook his hand. It was just like if you touch a hot wire. I never felt anything like it. And so I went outside. I was so under conviction that I wanted to know the truth. And so I throwed my cigarettes under the car. And I looked up to heaven. I said, Lord, I says, if this is what I'm looking for, I says, let me shake his hand one more time. Let me feel that presence that I felt the first time. So I went back in there. I pressed my way through the crowd again and shook Brother BRANHAM's hand. And it's the same thing. I felt the same thing. I was satisfied. I didn't understand it, but I knew that what I was looking for, that I was happy. And I just went on till I received the baptism of the Holy Ghost, and God marvelously satisfied my heart and life. Later down the years, well, God revealed to me, you know, what the first and second, third pull was. But anyway, after that, we went on back home. And told my wife all the good things, what was taking place, and then give my testimony in church, you know, how God just opened my eyes to this message, you know. And so we went on after that, I guess maybe a couple of weeks later, my wife and I, we got in a car and we taken off back to California, our home that was there. And so Brother Branham was going to be up in Fresno, California, a little town outside Fresno. And so we found out, so we went up there. And we was sitting there in the church, and we just to being around Brother Branham and his presence, it was more unspeakable and full of glory. You just can't explain it, You just wanted to come back in his meetings. And so my wife, she went through the prayer line. Said, I want to go through the prayer line to be prayed for. Now, this is the same year as we was in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, about a month or so later. And so I was sitting there in the seat, and something says to me, get up and go thank Brother Branham for what he has done for you. And my heart just began to beat, Brother Peter, and it just kept getting harder and harder. And so he says, get up and go thank Brother Branham for what he's done for you. And so I got up and got in the line. I went in there, and when I got to Brother Branham, he just stopped and looked at me. He said, what can I do for you, brother? I said, Brother Branham, I just want to thank you for what you've done for me in the meeting at Pine Bluff, Arkansas. I give my heart to the Lord in your meeting. I just want to thank you. He just paused a minute, and he says, when there are 10 lepers cleansed and one returned to give God the glory. I didn't understand it. I hadn't read that much about the Bible. And he says to me, he says, what can I do for you, brother? I said, well, I didn't know what to say. I paused a minute, and I began to ask the Lord. I said, Lord, what shall I ask for, And something says to me, he said, ask Brother Branham to pray for you that you go all the way. And I said, Brother Branham, would you pray for me that I will go all the way? And he said a simple prayer, but words couldn't express it, the goodness that it's always stuck with me. And it never has got away from me, He said, I'll meet you on the other side. That part I've always stood on, Brother Peter. And so later down the years, and I think it's 1958, Brother Branham was in San Jose. So I wanted to take some pictures of Brother Branham, and we were out there in the back, the auditorium, as he's coming into the back. And there's a sister out there named Sister Listen. I asked Sister Listen, I said, Brother Branham's going to be through here in a minute. And I said, I'd love to have you take some pictures of us, together. And so Brother Branham showed up, and so I taken some pictures of him and his family. And so I asked him, I said, Brother Branham, I'd sure love to have a picture of you. And so he said, well, sure, brother. I'll never forget them words. He says, I was standing just about this far from him. He says, let's get a little closer. He pulled me in towards him, and put his arm around me. And he says, I said, Brother Branham, I said, I give my heart to Lord in your meeting in 1946. And he says, no, brother, it was 1947. And so it got me thinking, and got me digging a little more, what he said. And but anyway, after that, I began to see who the man was. God began to open my eyes, Brother Peter, who the prophet was, As he said, on tape, it's John the Baptist, the forerunner of the first coming. He says he'll pack this message forerunner of the second coming. But see, I didn't realize that then. But it wasn't time for it to be revealed to me, even though that seed was lying there, and that, that had to shine on it, for it to come forth. But gradually it was coming forth. And I just thank the Lord for that. I'm glad to share the little experience with a brother that over there in Belgium, and that I had seen the prophet and the prophet's son, the prophets, and the daughters, I've been with them, and it's been a blessing to me. And I'm very happy to share these few words with you.